Welcome everyone to this next session with Summer Crider. Very excited to have you here. I'm just going to share a little bit about Summer, who's the founder of the Giving Cypress and Nature and Forest Therapy Guiding Business, and a professor at Gallaudet University who brings forth access intimacy in their transformative work. As a deaf woman and queer guide, their insights illuminate the nexus of accessibility, intimacy, and nature therapy. Rooted in disability studies and cultural studies, Summer's discourse reshapes paradigms of understanding how we navigate back to our most natural selves and care for one another and other living beings. And with Summer, we also have Danny, who will be interpreting. Thank you so much, Summer and Danny, for being here. I'm looking forward to your presentation. And the title of this presentation is Access, Intimacy in Nature, Assessing Care Through Direct Experiences. Thank you so much.
Excellent. This is our deaf way of showing some applause. I'm waving my hands in the air, and I'm so excited. I'm speaking to you all through American Sign Language, and I'm going to just want to test, make sure you guys can all hear the interpreter. Everybody can hear Danny, sounding good. That's my voice for today. Great. Okay, sounds good. For accessibility reasons, I'm going to go ahead and give a visual description of myself. I'm Summer. I'm a white female with bangs and glasses. I've got long brown hair with a green t-shirt on. And behind me, I'm on a white couch with a wall and a framed painting of the moon on the water behind me. Usually I start off with a visual description because there may be people here who are blind, deaf-blind, participating in this webinar. My pronouns are they, them, and I am very excited to present today because I'm really fascinated with the topic of nature and relationships and well-being. Relationships are something that I just feel completely fit this topic when we're talking about access intimacy. And I'm going to explain a little bit about my experience as a deaf, disabled person, queer person, and how I've navigated that to become a guide. I've been a guide for 5 years now, and the experiences I've had in developing my relationships with nature and also with the humans that we interact with, the disability community, and all the different communities. That'll be a lot of what I'm presenting about today. Okay. So today our objectives for this presentation, we're going to talk about able-bodied and disabled ways of living and being. Disabled ways of existing on this earth. We all have different ways that we live and breathe. And within the world, we all have different ways of being and how we navigate life within society. So I will share a little bit about the relationships between nature and disability. I think most people think that typically there's a disconnect there. It's hard to connect with nature with a disability, but I will explain how we connect. Different experiences with nature and relationships and those connections. And really what's so important is that reciprocity. Most of this all comes from my direct experience connecting with nature. Really, that direct experience means that, any barriers between, I guess you could use the word thresholds, right? Those thresholds of actually accessing nature or things that we don't often explore. So there's a transition to get to things that we don't often explore. And once we get past that threshold, we can really connect. And then we can find the natural beings in ourselves. And that's what I'm really talking about when I talk about direct experience. And as you can see, I am signing, I'm using ASL, American Sign Language. Many people who have met me in person know that I can use my voice, I can speech, and I lip read pretty well. Um, and that's because I was born hearing and I became deaf when I was 3. And from then on, my ways of communicating became more and more creative after I became deaf because we live in a able-bodied world where most people communicate through spoken language and speech. So becoming deaf really felt like a disconnect from that world because society looks at us as different. So when I started learning sign language and connecting through sign language, I was 4 years old. And luckily, my mother already knew her ABCs and sign. And so she really helped make that connection and that, the access to sound and spoken language. When I lost that, when I became deaf, I still had at least another new language and a new way of navigating communication available to me. And even though, I read, write, lip read, that's a lot of the ways I have to access sometimes with the able-bodied spoken world. Um, I also do have a cochlear implant. It's kind of like my hearing aid. It helps me, when I want to listen to music or maybe some birds chirping, but I still rely on the visual part of communication because I don't access speech through that. So anyone like, the interesting thing is hearing people can always learn sign, but deaf people cannot learn how to hear. It's not like a thing you can fix. So that's why I decided to make, well, my communication is sign language, and I have an interpreter here for my experience in my presentation today, we'll use an interpreter. My native language is sign, so that's what we're using today. So, talking about accessibility, this is a very broad definition, but sometimes people think accessibility is only for people who can't access experiences or maybe in their education, maybe in the working world. But access is also, it's a complicated thing. Everyone at one point in your life will experience something. Maybe it's a broken arm or a broken leg. Um, it might be temporary access needs that you have or permanent access needs. It's really complicated. Some people consider people who are pregnant, you know, they have a quote unquote, sometimes they call it a temporary disability where they have to really accommodate. And then after the baby's born, it's different. They go back to what they were before. Sometimes things like glasses, that's an accommodation, right? That is for accessibility. For the point of focusing not on the tangible and logistical, but really what we're talking about today is that emotional connection and what it means to be included and accepted. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today when we speak of accessibility. So disability solidarity, that's this last one here. It is the same to Ubuntu. It's that same phrase. It basically means I'm with you, which another phrase for that is Ubuntu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And many people are not familiar with this word access intimacy. I don't believe it's in the dictionary yet, even. But a person named Mia Mingus, who is a disabled queer activist, a BIPOC activist, they describe this concept, access intimacy, as this feeling where you don't really have to explain so hard my needs, this feeling of someone, who just kind of gets it. You don't have to explain it to me. I'm with you, right? It's a different feeling than when someone is like, how can I help you or how can I accommodate you? It's more feeling on equal playing ground of just like, what's your preferences? How can we learn together? Being patient through those things and just feeling like it's not a burden, someone who gets it. There's a snapshot here. This was my first experience with my cohort during the ANFT training program. When I first got into this training program, it was virtual for the first time. COVID happened and everyone had to transition to the virtual world. And that presented just more disconnection, not only for me, but really just it was not a natural way for us to learn at that time through Zoom. But when I finally was able to get together with my cohort, that was where we really explored getting out of my comfort zone because many of them, I was the first deaf person that they had ever met. And ANFT provided a lot of opportunities for us to just share our experiences and interact and feel accepted and included. And so that was really why I felt like nature therapy itself was a door not only to our healing through and with the forest, but it also opened the door for us to look at ourselves and how we are the same and how we are connected and how we are interconnected. So we have some questions here for reflection. The first one is, in what ways are we different? And in what ways are we the same? Our differences, maybe you and I have language differences, but we might speak different languages. You might look at me as a person with hearing loss. Some people say they call it a deaf gain. It's a different concept. I have a benefit of being deaf. Um, some of us have mobile limitations. Uh, our ages, we might be different ages. We might live in different countries. We're sitting in different places. We all have different backgrounds. But when we think about how we are the same, you know, we are humans. We all bleed the same blood. We all breathe oxygen. We all feel emotions. And really, we all are nature. So that's the other side of the coin there that I like to keep in mind. Many people feel when we're talking about our differences and how we're the same, they want to encourage that, oh, we are all the same. Um, and then if someone's not quite fitting the norm, it feels strange. And some people think disability is a bad word, right? It's considered quote unquote what they call unnatural. But really, it's just there are so many different ways to be disabled, and we're finding more and more evidence that nature really celebrates diversity and it celebrates different abilities. And so we're going to talk about that today. Some disabilities are visible. Sometimes you look at a person, maybe you see a person in a wheelchair and then it seems clear, okay, they have a disability. They might need access to get to the door or elevators. Some people might have a cane or different devices that they use. Some people you look at and their face looks different, or they might be missing a limb. Maybe they are blind and it's identifiable. Oh, this person has a disability. But there also are invisible disabilities. Um, so you look at someone and you don't notice anything different until you start to interact. And then maybe through that interaction, something comes up and, oh, maybe they speak a little different, or maybe their thought processes are different. So we have this list on the right. So deafness is an invisible disability, or it can be. A lot of people meet me and everything seems like it's going normal until we start speaking. And then they speak at me and I say, oh, wait, hang on, I'm deaf. And then a lot of times I get that, oh, I'm so sorry. We will discuss more about that and that experience of that feeling of disconnection when a person like finds out that I'm different, and how nature really encourages us to not worry about those differences and just understand our connection and our sameness. I do wish this presentation could be a little bit more interactive. I love like trying to figure out how many people are here um and just interact with the audience. We will have some time at the end for questions where we can interact a little bit more. But this is more of just a reflective question for you guys to think about now. When we think about people with disabilities, what do you think about when you think about those folks in nature and that representation of people with disabilities in nature? How often do we see that, and what does it look like? Is there a stereotype with that? Is nature accessible? Often we don't see people in wheelchairs in nature, right? And as a result of not seeing that happen, disabled people's experience in nature, do they have a deep experience in nature? That's the question I'm posing, just to think about what your thoughts are about that. So I decided to just Google image search disabled people in nature, and this was the first thing that came up. This is what I got. Hmm, interesting. I also got a different image, so I'm gonna go to the next one. Ah, okay, we have another one here. Someone outside. It seems like they're showing kind of a positive and negative view. This one's really positive, the other one's not quite so much. So I'm wondering, is there a middle ground? Is there something in the middle? Um, because people have a lot of different experiences and it can be pretty complicated. Sure, people with disabilities have to go through a lot to access nature sometimes. They might have a strong internal drive that gets them there. Or there could be some people that have more barriers involved. They themselves might believe that nature is separate, that it's not accessible. They might have learned that. In my own experience, as a deaf person, and I just, acquired a new disability in the last few years of ADHD and mental health and some other things. So neurodivergence on that and my connection with the deaf blind community and the deaf disabled community have taught me so much about the portrayal of people in nature and that kind of like soft interaction and that more hard and stubborn interaction. I do have an image up here. This is a group of friends of ours, and I think this is a perfect snapshot of the emerging language of the deaf-blind community. You see, everyone has their hands in touch on this image. Everyone's in contact with someone in some way, and there's a lot of laughter going on. Someone looking at this might not assume that there's any deaf-blind folks in this picture, but there are, and they are fully involved. They are in communication, they are laughing, there's so much joy, and they are all in the forest together. So this is after we did a forest therapy session. It was me and a woman named Haley. She herself is deafblind and is with several co-navigators who were with us, and it was so much fun. So often people don't see that portrayal of people with disabilities. So I wanted to include that in this one. This is that same session, and the two deafblind folks are describing the story of a tree. So you see the ASL sign for tree is here. It's my hand up in the air. And they were talking about climbing the tree. And so, I've got my two little fingers climbing up the tree here. But the reason we did this was, or you see here, people are touching behind her to show their presence, right? So the people behind her are saying, I'm present here. So if I can't see and I can't hear, how do I know when there are people around me and behind me? And so this language really incorporates all that touch and those examples of connections to show presence. And that says we are present. Our society does not really encourage touch. It's a little bit anti-touch. And as a result, we, including deaf-sided people, are a little bit touch deprived. So this slide says that collective access is when everyone is involved collectively. No one's separate, no one's outside of the group. And I think this was a really beautiful example of what disabled people can show us about relationships and our bodies. People with different experiences just teach us a lot. So, what about nature and access intimacy? So, remember, access intimacy is that feeling of just acceptance. I accept who you are. Um, and nature, when I walk into a forest, and I will say this is my own experience, my perspective based on my background. I grew up, my father was a wildlife biologist, and I grew up in the swamps of Florida. So I am comfortable in nature, and I always have been. Um, I know they have those horror movies in the dark forest and the swamp. I have never had any experiences like that. So I am coming with my own background and my experience. Because of my experiences growing up, I was really comfortable in nature, and that's where I found my role as a nature therapy guide because I really wanted to connect people who don't have that same experience, who don't feel completely accepted by nature. They think that, or don't feel like nature is home. And particularly people with disabilities who feel separate, like it's a separate thing. Oh, that's over there, that's kind of, most buildings are designed with accommodations to fit people with disabilities. People design their homes to be accessible to them, but out in nature, that's not designed for us. And so I really love to challenge people with disabilities to give them that reminder that nature if you let go of this idea of these access needs and you just think about direct experience. For example, if we're going to talk about wheelchairs, yes, wheelchairs are hard to go through that uneven terrain, the forest, all of that. But who says you have to get to a specific destination? You can experience nature. Maybe nature is directly on the forest floor, right? So with some folks, what I've done is we get on the ground, we get out of the wheelchair, we are literally on the ground, and we find the whole micro universe down there on the forest floor. And those folks can create relationships with all the plant life really close up. And from that experience, I really learned like, wow, just because, I'm a pretty tall person, my relationship with the forest floor, I didn't have a strong relationship with it because it was pretty far away from it most of the time. So taking the time to get down and explore really close up was awesome. And I have to thank the folks with disabilities who helped me find that experience because we did it together. Um, and it was really incredible. So we've got some more stories like that, but I just want to get back to how many examples there are of interdependence in nature. So I typed, again, this is what the internet says about interdependence. Some people think of it as the opposite of independence. Interdependence means that we do depend on others, but in this context, so I typed in interdependence and nature because really in the natural world, everything has to work together. Everything is interdependent. There are so many examples of symbiotic relationships. What like for example, sharks. Oh, actually, it's not sharks. It's the whales and the barnacles, right? Um, I know there. I'm sure there are a million out there. But nature, really, we also see really cute pictures. Maybe you've seen these of the dogs adopting a little animal that's been left behind from its parents, like a little baby deer or something, or a little bunny rabbit and a lion. There's a lot of those examples out there, but those can both be super sweet and cute, um, but also maybe not because nature also has predators and prey. And when we think of interdependence, it's also about that reciprocity with nature and between nature and humans being connected as one. And these two quotes I have here are invitations that I learned from ANFT. And when you want to become more intimate with nature, these are a few things you can say. And that feeling is so powerful. It reduces that feeling of isolation and loneliness and expands your feelings of empathy and your sense of connection, really. So, care webs, this is another concept built by disabled people. And it's about how if someone is hurt or if someone needs help, we can all come together. Maybe we'll do a meal train or support in some way. In my situation, when I became a guide, my confidence to be able to guide was pretty low because I had never seen any examples of deaf or disabled guides out there. I didn't have any representation or anybody to look up to. I felt like the only one. And so I got a lot of invitations like listen to the birds or sometimes visual ones that were very based on specific sounds, like those five primary senses that we use. But working with people with disabilities and really working with nature, I was starting to find there are definitely more than five senses. Um, the list really goes on, and it was such a beautiful experience, both in nature and with people with disabilities, how both of those things really helped me feel more connected through more than just those five senses. Let's see how much time we have. Yes, I would love to tell a little story here. Just a few short stories. I did write a lot of these out, which if you wanted to find, there's a blog on my website. Partnered with ANFT through the support of ANFT. I blogged while I was traveling all over 2 years ago. Met tons of deaf people and different people in the disability community. And so you can read more stories there if you want, but just a few here. So, turtle pace. I have here a tattoo on my wrist. It's a turtle. I learned from one of my good deaf disabled friends who has CP, cerebral palsy. During one of our walks, she walks slow, and she often felt in the beginning like, oh, I have to hurry to keep up with the group, right? So I told her, no, no, no. Let's all actually become like turtles, and we're all gonna move slowly. And from that experience, I learned the word crip time. That word crip, you guys might hear that and it sounds, oh, that is offensive. What's up with that word? But it's really becoming more of a reclaimed word by the disability community themselves. Um, and so that's a concept of just slowing down and disconnecting from that concept of being time sick, right? So worried about where we're going, how fast we're getting there. Um, so I've learned how to slow down a lot. I drive a little slower. I do things with more intention. I give people a lot more time to finish their assignments sometimes. As a professor, I found that reframing of time has been really beneficial instead of always being in such a hurry. Um, okay, this next one is a story. So if you guys are ever in a group of deaf people who are all signing, anybody know what that sounds like for y'all hearing folks? Some people have heard deaf people like, laughing or their voices coming out sometimes. Sometimes we are in when we're in the forest and we're on a walk, we are still having conversations through sign, but it might be totally quiet. It's funny because I guided one group and there was only one hearing participant who often went to that park where I was guiding. And so she decided to join us. And I warned her, I was said, hey, you're with a bunch of deaf folks now. And she was like, oh, fine, no worries. I don't really know sign, but it's no worries. I'll join in. So she quietly joined us. And then a few of us noticed a deer and a bunny. We saw just a lot more more than human, more of the more than human world pop up around us. And I think because it was so quiet, and that hearing woman just had her jaw dropped, and she's like, I walk in this park so often for so many years, and I've never seen that many animals around. So, in some ways, us deaf folks taught her, silence can be really magical. Um, there are more stories, but I do a lot of blindfold walks in my guiding. Um, because we are so reliant on vision and trying to overcome the fears that some people have, um, just not always using our primary senses. Okay, I know it's almost time to wrap up, so I'll just get the last part here. I really do want to talk about direct experiences. I feel like direct experiences are so important when we're not, when we can think about not so much the barriers, but how can we learn and be curious and support and be in solidarity? Because some people feel like it's important to search for people who know sign, and if you don't know sign language, maybe, okay, we have to look for interpreter real quick. But if you and I can connect, um, sometimes when we put an interpreter there, it's a different experience. Um, if we can directly connect, sometimes we can use gesture, and it might be a struggle, but sometimes through that struggle, if you give it time and you think about different ways to play, you may find a deeper connection. And this quote is by a deaf-blind architect who is a friend of mine, Robert Servage. It says, often we ask, how do we make it more accessible? Instead, ask, what feels beautiful? For me, there's a photo here behind here guiding someone who's a deaf-blind person. And I did not explain every single visual thing that was happening because a lot of times through that visual description, I take away the actual touch and the direct experience and that relationship that that person can have, say, for example, with this tree. Um, Really anyone, a person with a disability or an able-bodied person, you can't really just describe everything. You have to have that direct experience with it. And this is just a reminder that spoken language, there is a belief that everything originated through gesture. If we think of cavemen way back in the day, before spoken language, there were drawings and stories and gesture, which eventually became spoken language and became everything else. So just a reminder that everything comes from gesture, and we gesture all of the time. We have different gestures for all of these feelings here: sad, angry, happy. You can ask people all around the world from different places. You'll find there's a lot of similarities in those um, gestures to describe things like this. In different countries, every country has their own sign language, so sign language differs everywhere, the same as spoken language. But there also is that connection and similarity because of the gestures involved. Okay, I see here we have 5 minutes left, and This is really just more of a summary of what I explained and my own experiences guiding and more. There's been more and more here. Aha, we made it to the conclusion. And this just says we must move beyond our cultural beliefs that tell us we are only worth as much as we can produce. Like you must have a degree, you must do all this. And so we really want to get away from that and understand that disability and the natural world are completely connected and both can be marginalized and misunderstood. And when we're struggling or we're overwhelmed with chaos, we don't have to give up on life or humanity. We know that because that's how we, disabled and others, live. We experience what it's like to struggle and that adversity. Um, so if you listen to our stories and include us, and maybe we'll have that reciprocal experience and we can both grow from that. And our last one here is true healing happens when the action of healing is inclusive. So this is my website. I know someone was asking before that has more stories on it. A blog. You can contact me through here. Anyone is welcome to contact. I do offer workshops and courses too. They are all voice accessible. If you want to learn more about that, captions and all that, I'd be so happy to chat with you. And so that is the end. We made it through.
Thank you so much, Summer and Danny, for this amazing presentation. There was someone asking to see the previous slide, the one before the conclusion. Someone was asking to see that slide one more time. And I guess, we can also just send out the recording and they will see it then.
I think I can
there
get it
you
back
are.
there.
All right, great. That one, yes. And I just want to check if there are any questions for Summer. There are a few comments in the chat. All right. So some of the comments, oh, there's something here. Okay, no, thank you, Summer, for this presentation. Another comment is excellent. Thank you. Thank you for this valuable lived experience and expertise interconnecting us all. Thank you, Summer, for this powerful and thought-provoking presentation. I'm glad you brought in the power of touch to convey I am here and I ponder on the reciprocity of touch when we connect with the natural world. You have cemented my desire to learn ASL. Thank you too, Danny, for your skilled translation. Thank you so much for your wisdom and invitation to heal. Great. To heal in beauty. Thank you so much, Summer, for sharing your amazing experience and the amazing work that you are doing to really bring in and support people and remembering that relationship. I'm very grateful for you.
Mhm.
Great. And we will continue in about 15 minutes with a conversation between Josep Maria Malarach and Amos Clifford. And the title is Singing Vespers with the Wolves and Other Stories. See you in about 15 minutes.